A little bit of happiness. All right, folks, so we're ready. Are you ready? Thank you for coming out to the Adler Planetarium tonight. I hope everybody's having a good time. I know we are. And we are here for a very important subject. It's near and dear to all of our hearts. It is the cultural legacy of Star Trek. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's just go down the line very quickly. I know it's been a long night, but I'm going to give you guys a quick recap. So we've had our 5-year mission cut down to 3. We've been through drought and deluge. We've been to cons. We've shaken our fists and yelled, "Con!" And we've asked J.J. Abrams, is that con? Or is it not? We've had the originals and following generations, and they've taken us on enterprising voyages through deep space. Your captain may not be my captain, but we can talk for hours about the pros and cons of why Benjamin J. Sisko is the best captain in the universe. We've had an older captain and they complain. We've had a black captain and they complain. We had a female captain and they complain. We had a kind of youngish captain again and they complained, but it was for various other reasons. But here we are, and we're here to discuss, like I said, the cultural impact, and we've learned a lot about the world and ourselves through Star Trek. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to this amazing panel of people to my right. First and foremost, we have Michi Trota. We have the wonderful Tanya DePass. And we have my new friend Mohanraj. So ladies, I'm going to ask you, just tell us a couple of things about yourselves and let us know how you got into Trek.
We should start with Marianne, don't we? This is not a family event, right? So like the kids are.
Oh no, this is
This is an adult. Okay. So I was 10 years old, and I had been watching Star Trek on TV in reruns. I was born in '71, so I was watching the original series, and I loved it. And I asked my dad, I had seen somehow, there was a Star Trek mini-con happening at my local library, and I said, could I go please? And he was like, science fiction library, of course. And so he took me and he dropped me off and he said he'd be back in 2 hours. And so I just started wandering around, and I didn't know anything about conventions. I'd never been to one before. And there was this long row of tables, the dealers' tables. And I sat down because I was little, and next to the table, and I started paging through what they had under in a box under the table, which turned out to be Slash. So that was my introduction to Star Trek fandom. And it was Kirk Spock Slash. There was nothing else back then, right? So it was the classic, only the original, and so. One could argue that it shaped my entire life. I spent my 20s as an erotica writer, and now I am a somewhat semi-respectable professor at UIC in the English department, and I'm writing science fiction.
So for me, Star Trek started with the original series. And seeing Uhura was very formative for me, and the first movie I can remember going to was the original Star Trek movie. So, that kind of cemented, hey, a black woman on TV who is not a maid. So, that really stuck with me. And so that sucked me in, and I never looked back. And as for what I do, I actually run my own nonprofit for diversity in gaming. And I'm Chicago-based, so if any of you are game-related, come and see me.
So my parents watched the original series, but I did not fall in love with Star Trek until Next Generation. Anyone remembers back in the late 80s, it was War of the Worlds, the TV series, followed by Star Trek Next Generation, and I really wanted just to start drinking tea, Earl Grey hot, before I even discovered coffee was a thing. And it was just no turning back from there. I think Star Trek, The Undiscovered Country was the first movie Star Trek that I saw in the theater, and it was Klingons and Shakespeare, so that hits me right where I live. And science fiction has been such a huge part of my life. It is now what I do. By day, I am a editor at Encyclopedia Britannica, and at night I do a lot of organizing within the nerd community through Chicago Nerd Social Club, as managing editor for Uncanny Magazine. We just won a Hugo! First Filipina ever to win a Hugo Award. And I also fire spin with the Rax Geek Geek and Belly Dance performance, and one of my last pieces was actually spinning LED fans in a Starfleet uniform.
I know that is quite a lot to take in. She gets a lot done. So to just round out the table here. So, like many of you, I was introduced to Star Trek, the original series, through my dad. So it's the first time I've been able to do this. So let's give my dad and all geek dads a hand. Now, that's how I was introduced with Like Michi. That's not how I fell in love. Because when I saw Star Trek, the original series, it was on right after Batman 66. So that camp was kind of neck and neck. But the man that got me into Star Trek was the one and only LeVar Burton. You all may remember there was a special on Reading Rainbow where he actually got to introduce us to the Next Generation set and all the different science that went into it. And we got to see Michael Dorn kick a door open, which is kind of awesome. You can listen to an in-depth interview with my dad, between my dad and myself, just having a conversation about Trek on my podcast, the GCPD podcast, the Games, Comics, and Puppy Dogs podcast. We talk about 2 of those things. So let's get back into Trek. So, how has Trek affected the sci-fi genre, in your opinions, and what would you consider its legacy?
Oh gosh, I think for me, it's a lot of it's the character interactions. So much of what makes really good sci-fi for me is getting to see the characters interacting within that science fiction universe. The lasers, the spaceships, the alien planets are really cool, but seeing how people's relationships develop, that has been, I think, one of the imprints that Star Trek has left on how we have seen science fiction evolve since the original series, since Star Trek has become so much of the science fiction landscape.
I think it's the technology. I mean, I remember seeing the original tricorder that you flipped open, and then eventually having a flip phone, and now having an iPhone and a tablet and all this stuff where it's touchable. And this is what I grew up seeing, and I never thought it would actually exist. And I think it's also the exploration, because I'm a big nerd. I like to travel. I like to go do stuff. And if you leave me alone in a museum all day, you may find me again in the same spot you left me if there's like stuff to look at in terms of, travel or things that are undiscovered that look alien actually on our planet, which is why hopefully if I get to Australia or something, I may or may not come back.
I think I'm going to just recap. I wrote an essay for Uncanny Magazine about Star Trek for the 50th anniversary, and what I talked about was its spirit, and I think that is unique. And then when Roddenberry had this vision of humans going out and exploring and meeting aliens and getting along and creating this united federation of planets, and these ideas that Enterprise was a ship of exploration, it was not a warship. It was, seeking, and that the Vulcan had this emblem of infinite diversity and infinite combinations, right? All of these ideas are so central to Star Trek and so unusual. And I think, for 50 years, we've watched that vision kind of hold firm. At the same time, in other genres, we're watching Superman battling Batman, and I mean, just like crazy things where you're like, this is not what the original vision looked like. It's gone super dark, and as much as I appreciate the explorations, I think there's something, there's something really valuable about the way Star Trek keeps coming back. And they go dark in Deep Space Nine, they have Section 31, there's all kinds of dark corners of the Star Trek universe, but we keep coming back to the core vision. And I think that's really important. It gives me hope when I'm reading the news, So.
Thank you for that. So over the years, we've seen Star Trek evolve from a niche fan base to more of a wide stream sort of thing. So what do you think is responsible for that shift?
I think actually, like a lot of it's just media consumption is such a huge thing for all of us, and the fact that even though Star Trek went off the air for a while, it kept living in novel form, in comics. And while I was doing some research for this panel, I was looking at it and I didn't realize how many different types of crossovers they had in the comics with Star Trek. There was a point where they had a crossover with both the Next Generation crew and also the original crew with the X-Men, and there's a panel of Spock actually kicking Wolverine's ass. That's sort of really awesome. But there were like Star Trek kept living in these it kept living even though it wasn't on the air from all that time from the original series to Next Generation. And even, we had the movies, and it actually, I think it proved that there was a media empire to be built. And this is happening at the same time as we have things like Star Wars, which was definitely building a multimedia empire. So there's a little bit of that. And there's also the fact that it became easier for broadcast. It became easier for people to see the shows in syndication. The technology just kept getting better, and I think it kept pulling in people because Star Trek never talks down to its audience. It's always about appealing to what makes us human, and even if you are not a science fiction fan per se, I think there's a lot to find in Star Trek that is, whether you're interested in the series, whether you like big action movies, whether you're into the science and nitpicking the science, because God knows everybody does that. I think there's just a lot to appeal in Star Trek where you don't have to be part of the fan base in order to enjoy it.
I don't know what I can follow up with after Spock versus Wolverine.
It's totally there. You should look for it. It's awesome.
Oh, I believe you. But I'm just like, what can I say after that? But I think it's also people passing it on. A lot of people I've met that are in fandom are adults who are passing it on to their kids or are, in my age range and their parents passed it down to them. So it's becoming a cultural thing where people pass it on and, give their kids their magazines or talk about the conventions they go to or take them. Some people have gone to conventions in utero at this point. So,
They're here right now, yes.
Yes, I'm sure there are. So I think it's, just passing it on as a cultural artifact as well.
Yeah.
I guess I would add two things. One is, when you talk about these spin-offs and whatever else, I was actually looking for in my basement, and I couldn't find them when I was, again, like a teenager. I was at Universal, and they had this Star Trek thing with a green screen where you could play Kirk or you could play Spock, and the whole bridge crew would be behind you, and you went through a little script. It was great. I don't know if they still do that. It was awesome. You got a videotape to take home with you, and so somewhere in my house there's a videotape, two of them. One of me is Kirk, and one of me is Spock. So when I was looking for that, I found actually these LPs of Star Trek Other Adventures, and they had like a graphic comic inside with the LP. And I have not had a record player in a very long time, so I can't actually listen to these. But it's interesting that, and they must have been from the 80s or even earlier, that there was so much production of material, right, that went out there. I kind of want to give some credit to Doctor Who, because that is where I remember science fiction cracking into the mainstream, and suddenly, like, my sisters who were not science fiction geeks and their friends and so on were all talking about Doctor Who, and I kind of think David Tennant in particular gets credit for being hot, and people were watching him, and that became a way in and kind of like pushed the door open. And now with Game of Thrones, like, suddenly the whole world is like here in our corner of geekdom, which is a little disconcerting.
Well, I think it's also like, it kind of wormed its way into just people being able to reference things like you say red shirt, and someone doesn't have to have watched Star Trek to really know what that is. Like, John Scalzi's talked about how when he picked up that idea to write red shirts, he was like stunned. Nobody had done it before because he's like, this is the lowest possible hanging fruit. How has nobody picked it? Okay, it's mine. And anyone who has seen Galaxy Quest at this point, I saw it for the first time finally this year. But Kind of like it, yeah. If you've seen Galaxy Quest, I feel like you've seen Star Trek. That is Star Trek. That's what a lot of people
If you don't know Galaxy Quest, it looks like a parody, but it's like a love letter to Star Trek, and you should just go rent it and watch it. It's awesome. It's awesome. I mean, it starts off. I was sort of cringing at the beginning, right, when we first saw it in theaters, and it's, you know, the actors making fun of the fans, and there is some famous stuff about Kirk, you know, about Shatner and fans and whatever else.
Oh, yeah.
And so, like, you watch this and you're like, oh no, why am I here? Why have I spent money to see this? But it gets so good. So just go watch it.
Yeah, was it the story that the guy who played Riker, Jonathan Frakes, actually called up Patrick Stewart and was like, no, really, you need to see this movie. Because Patrick Stewart had apparently been like, no, I don't want to see something that's going to make fun of a thing that has become a big part of my life. And then now Patrick Stewart's like one of the movie's biggest cheerleaders. It's awesome.
That is pretty awesome, and I think that has a lot to do with the fandom growing over the years as well. It's just like the cast is just so friendly. You go to conventions, take pictures with them, they seem to really get along with one another. And it's a wonderful thing. The majority of them really seem to get along with one another.
I'll say one of my first dates with my husband was to Boston Comic Con, and we went to see Michael Dorn panel. He was awesome.
All right. Michael Dorn is awesome. So throughout the various iterations of Star Trek, we've seen the show reflect times in which they were created, like the Civil Rights Movement. Where do you see these changes reflected? What sticks out to you? Do you think the new movies reflect this as well?
I feel like the new movies reflect somebody's love of explosions and lens flare. You
Yes, but the Beastie Boys works.
Okay, I'll take this one for the team. I'll take the L for the team. As far as the new movies, I think they're trying to reflect kind of what's going on now, but they don't quite get there. If you've not seen all the 3 new revisions, skip the middle one. The one that's out now is great, and it's actually more of a callback to the series that we fell in love with, I think. And I think it also gives a chance for a lot of what fans, a lot of what Roddenberry may have originally envisioned to come forward. But the movies are definitely trying to reflect what's going on now. The series at the time, you know, like Voyager, DS9, Enterprise. I like Enterprise, fight me. I think that they couldn't help but be touched by the culture and what was going on. No media exists in a vacuum, as Michi and I are fond of saying. So they definitely were reflections of the time period they were made in. And hopefully, if there are more new Trek movies, that they will continue to do so, but not be the third movie going forward. If they keep in that vein, I'll be very happy.
Yeah, there was, I think, a balance of the humor and also the fact that we actually got to see the crew having relationships with each other outside of the ship. I think that's what made the third movie really, the third of the reboot movies work for me, is that we got to see that the crew actually have relationships with each other even when they are not on the ship. And that they were constantly concerned about each other. I think this was the first movie where I actually really liked Kirk as a person.
Wow.
Yeah. There were a lot of reasons why I related to Kirk in this particular film, but like Deep Space Nine, going from, I love Next Generation. There is a lot to love about the Next Generation, but I always felt like there was something a little bit sort of removed and still very like we are looking at social issues through this faux objective lens a little bit. The times when it really worked for me was when they got into the nitty gritty. It got very gray. There were no easy answers, and you would come away from the episode feeling a little uneasy. Deep Space Nine I really loved because I think, particularly because we had a black man in the lead role who was leading the cast, there were a lot of things that the show was not able to back away from. That he was able to, and he was in a position to call out his crew members who are his family and his friends when they're suddenly like, we're going to go into the holodeck and play like we're in the gangsters in the 1930s. And he's like, no. It's like, no, this like, you can go do that, but this is not going to be fun for me because I am a black man, this was not going to work for me in the 1930s, and I cannot pretend that I can go back to a time when that wouldn't have been an issue. And I love that Star Trek I really would love for Star Trek moving forward to be able to push that because we have gone from, we have a crew with one of each to, we have a crew again with one of each, but it's getting a little better. And then it gets messy in Deep Space Nine, and I want to see it continue being messy and inspiring.
Well, we're going to get to our hopes for
Matt,
Discovery. Yeah, please, thank you.
No, can I just add, actually? So, I feel like I love the series for different reasons, right? So it's not even just about reflecting the times, but like, original series, I love for the relationship between Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, kind of more than anything. It was sort of unique, and this very intense sort of thing. Next Gen brought it at its best, nuance and sophistication and this complexity of, episodes like The Best of Both Worlds were just kind of amazingly good, right? They were mostly kind of standalone episodes still, or two-parters. Then you get to Deep Space Nine, and it is a time when we are, where in fact, the networks used to kind of require that Star Trek wrap up every episode in a neat little bow because of, questions about syndication and where it's going to get picked up and so on. So there was sort of publishing, marketing-related reasons for this structure. By the time Deep Space Nine came along, we were seeing much more serial storytelling in various shows, not just Star Trek, but Deep Space Nine kind of took it and ran with it, and suddenly we're getting, but apparently there was another one before that, in any case, but there were these long war arcs, and they were able to get really complex characters like Garrick, who, I don't think you could have quite envisioned him back with the original series. I'm personally a little disappointed with where we are right now because I felt Voyager did some good things. It was limited in certain ways. Enterprise, good things, but also limited in certain ways. And I feel like the recent movies have actually been taking kind of a big step back in terms of complexity and nuance and sophistication and challenging the reader. And I think they've got the charm, right? And they're doing some nice, I enjoyed Beyond. I had a smile on my face as I was watching the whole thing, right? It was a delight. But the only time I was emotionally moved during that movie was when Sulu's husband showed up with the little girl, right? Which, is not actually about Star Trek, right? That was the only, emotional moment for me. So I feel like we have a problem and we need to kind of demand more of the studios in some sense, right?
And we can and we should, and that actually brings us to the upcoming Star Trek Discovery, which I know a lot of us are looking forward to. Unfortunately, we found out that it's been pushed back to May of next year from January, so hopefully that gives them some more time to add some of those things that Marianne was just talking about. So speaking of Star Trek Discovery, what do you hope to see from this new series?
A really representative crew, and for actually, I want the crew to actually reflect what this room looks like, what fandom looks like, and for them to take risks. And I really hate that we have to frame it as having a woman of color in the captain's chair as taking a risk, but it is past time. It is past time for us to see that person in the captain's chair, Angela Bassett for captain. Or failing that, Michelle Yeoh, but that would just be my.
Well, I can jump off of that because I didn't even realize until you said that. What I actually want is not just a woman of color as captain, although I do want that, but I want Shonda Rhimes. I want to see what she would do with Star Trek. If she could bring that complexity. You don't like her, no? I love her stuff. I love it. I love her stuff, and I love the nuance and the complexity and the richness, and that level of storytelling in Star Trek would be amazing. It'd be amazing. No.
Give me Ava DuVernay.
Oh, yeah.
I said this facetiously before the panel started, but first and foremost, I want it not to suck. But I want, I want also, not just a diverse cast, but I want something beyond a stereotype.
Yes.
I want people to have
absolutely.
lives, and I'm that person that doesn't always want a happy ending for the crew, because life is not always a happy ending. I love my media, I love, cheerful, sappy stories on occasion. But I want some tragedy in there, and I want that tragedy to make the character stronger. And that's just me. Maybe I'm that asshole. But
No, as long as the tragedy's not fridging anybody for
oh
somebody
no,
else's.
if there's fridging, there will be angry letters. But I would like to see, like a black woman in charge who is not also petite, skinny, light skinned, and I say this as a light skinned woman. So I would like someone who is not stereotypical and, more of a European beauty standard.
I would like to see an Asian on the crew that does not know how to do martial arts. But I feel like I really want Trek to push that boundary of, I want us to be able to see what those characters are like when they're stuck on that ship day after day after day, and we actually get to see them as people, which is really, when Trek does that well, that is fantastic storytelling, because you can have, the reason why Best of Both Worlds works so well is because the crew loves Picard. Right. It's not just because, Picard's been turned into a Borg, it's, oh my god, this is our friend, what the hell are we going to do, and how do we do this, and protect the Federation, and keep things from going all completely to hell. Like, that is, when Star Trek can do that, and it can do it in a way that reflects a lot of the things that we struggle with daily. And it can still be inspiring and uplifting, even if it's giving us those hard endings where not everybody gets a happy ending, not everybody makes it out alive. I think Trek is capable of that. It has given that to us before, and I think we deserve to get that.
Do you remember that episode in Next Gen, Lower Decks, I think was the title, right? Do you guys know that one? It's,
yes.
And it's one of these episodes where it's 4 completely new characters, and you're like, who are these people? And it turns out that, and they're like playing cards, right? And it looks just like the upper level people, but it's the lower level people, and you get to know their stories. And it was a great episode, but it also made me kind of sad, because I'm like, we had many seasons of being with the same people over and over and over again. And Enterprise is a big ship, right? Why can't they introduce more people and have like a much richer landscape to work with?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
See, that's why I'm hoping that Discovery does, kick off something interesting and give us an anthology show. That would be great. I would love to see that.
Yeah.
I would love to finally get the Michael Dorn captain story, that Worf captain story that he's been pushing forever. I want to see that. So, we're going to wrap up here. This is the last question.
And we'll do Q&A.
We'll do a little Q&A after this. Why do you think Trek has lasted for half a century? And how long will we still be talking about this?
Cynical answer for me is money, because it is making a lot of money for the producers. That's just the way it is, and I'm actually happy about that, because as long as Trek keeps making money, then I'm not going to have to be going to cons and getting down and doing the little rat finger dance, going through the comic book bins and hunting and dealing with allergies because of all of the dust. When I'm looking for things, it is easy to share. It is easier now than more than ever to be able to share Trek fandom with other people, and I think that's why it lasts. We can share it so easily, and it's like, oh, you like characters. Let me tell you about Star Trek characters. You like science and want to pick apart whether light speed is possible. Let's talk about Star Trek. There are multiple avenues to connect with it, and that's awesome.
I'm going to go back to my answer of being generational. We're all here. There are people of all ages in here, and we just keep passing it down. And as long as I'm around, I'm going to enjoy Trek. And if I get a chance to go talk to someone else about it, or find someone who's younger and tell them about it, or really instill that love of science and science fiction, and that's why I think it's stuck around and it'll be around as long as we are.
So when Trek went off the air the first time, I assume a lot of you know there was a letter writing campaign, and it was specifically 2 people, right? A husband and wife. I think it's Bijo and Ed Trimble, I think, who kind of sat down and like in a very old school sort of way called people up and was sort of like, here, can you write a letter? Tell 10 more people to write a letter. Tell 10 more people to write a letter. And they flooded Paramount with letters, right? So, I mean, Trek is on the air because of y'all, right? It's because of the fans. That is why, and as long as people keep loving it the way they do, I mean, it speaks to something to generate that kind of passion. And so I think it's going to be here another 50 years, another 100 years, you know, until we actually go out there and meet the aliens, right?
Well, there was like, it's the hidden history of Trek that I never knew that so much of Trek fandom that kept the cons going was run by women. I had no idea. And that's like, it's that kind of community that I think really, when Trek is at its best, when Trek fandom is at its best, it's actually pulling all of us in and asking everyone to be their best selves, which is why it hurts so much when we're not, like when Trek fandom isn't that way. But I think as long as we keep going, it has a lot of reasons why.
The fandom also, I want to say, really enriches the universe, right? Yeah. So like all of, you know, I started this talking about slash fiction, and I was joking, but I was also not joking, right? Because, you know, like I'm bi, and seeing in this fiction these possibilities that were not on screen for decades, right? It was just incredible. And I think that Star Trek fandom, and all of you who are writing fan fiction or drawing comics or whatever else, right? You are expanding the universe, even if it's not "quote unquote" authorized.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know,
Peter David's his New Frontier was basically glorified fan fiction, but I ate that up. I loved it. It's fantastic stuff. So we want to know why Star Trek has carried on for so long. You look around this room, everybody. This is why Star Trek keeps on going, because of us, because of the passion that we have. So I want you to give yourselves a round of applause. Also, thank you, Tanya, for answering this barrage of questions. We're going to answer some questions of yours. We have about 5 or 6 minutes to answer some questions. So if you want to raise your hand and ask a question, or just, you know, say something awesome.
One here.
Yes, sir. Oh, all right. You guys can. Okay. Yes, go right ahead.
So can we start a letter writing campaign to get all those things in Discovery that we want?
That's what Twitter is for.
Make a hashtag. We'll get it done.
BuzzFeed article.
Yes. All the BuzzFeed listicles of things, like ways we don't want Star Trek to screw up.
That's right.
No, we'll just put it on Black Twitter and they'll take it.
Yes.
With gifts.
So then you had.
Okay. I just wanted to ask what your opinions about the fan productions of Star Trek and the recent conflicts between the studios and some of these fan productions.
So, I mean, I watched one of the movies, and I enjoyed it. I thought it was so the studios, so the fans put together some pretty big things that look like movies, right? And the company has come down and said they can't do things like use actors from the actual show anymore, and they can't. There's now a whole set of restrictions on it, and I don't know. Personally, I think that's a huge mistake, and I wish they hadn't said that. So that's just my.
I'm with you because, I mean, fans kept the show alive.
Yeah.
So to me, that's a huge disservice to turn around and go, no, you can't play with all of these things and show your appreciation for something that generation of fans before you actually kept on the air.
Yeah, and I honestly, like, I don't know what they're afraid of in some sense, right? I mean, there's so, I'm a professional writer, and there are things about, like, trademark, you have to defend it or else you lose it, etc. There are some aspects to that maybe they're a little concerned about, but I kind of doubt it. I actually think this is more about, somehow protecting the franchise and the money, which is, I don't know, I find kind of infuriating. And I say this as someone who hopes they will one day call me up and ask me to write a Star Trek novel, because I've got it plotted out and it's ready.
Looking forward to that. Yes, sir.
So there's been a lot of talk over a long period of time about the lack of LGBT characters in Star Trek, and beyond there was just the subtle reference to Sulu, which I thought was very well done because it was it wasn't a big deal. It was just the way it was. And I found it surprising that George Takei was not a fan of it, because I felt it was a tribute to him at the same time that it was a very understated.
I think he changed his opinion somewhat, right?
Did he? Okay, because I liked that. I mean, you don't want to make a big deal out of it, because it's not a big deal in the future. It's everybody's accepted, right? So.
Well, in theory, but the people making the media exist now. And I could see both sides of it, because he wrote a very long post about, this is a character he's intrinsically tied to, and it felt very weird for him to turn around and do this when, now he is someone who's worked so hard for LGBT rights and everything else. So it just seemed very odd to turn around and go, oh, by the way, Sulu's gay, haha, we never told you. So, so I could see where he was coming from, but I think he has changed position on it, and I did see the movie, and I thought it was, just, he's going to see his husband, it's cool, it's not, oh my god, Sulu's gay.
Right.
Yeah, I think he also was very invested in Roddenberry's vision, right? And so he said, well, this wasn't how Roddenberry wrote the character or saw the character. But I saw something recently where he was, after he had seen the movie, where he was like, they didn't even kiss. I can't believe they didn't even kiss.
Some people it's not
I
enough, some
think
people
the
it's
concept threw him a little, is the impression I got. So. I was sort of frustrated that they kind of gave us Jadzia, and then they, there was such possibility there, and then they kind of backed away from it in very frustrating ways. So, and then there's an episode of Next Gen sorry, I feel strongly about this, but there's an episode of Next Gen with Riker and the people who don't have gender. No, but I want to go back and watch it now, because in the context of today, I feel like it would be, I don't know, it would be differently inflected watching it today. So, anyway.
I'm concerned about going back and watching some of that today.
Oh, you should be concerned.
But sir, I implore you to read New Frontier about Peter David, the book I was talking about earlier, because they do have some characters in there that may,
That episode of Next Gen, Jonathan Frakes said he wished that role was played by a man.
Yes. Because it was genderless, but they definitely quoted her female hardcore.
Yeah, that would have been amazing, yeah.
Okay, the comfy person in the front row, beanbag stack here.
I have a lot to say. Well, just
I just wanted to mention really quick about the George Takei thing. I think what he really wanted to say about that and suddenly making Sula gay is that it cheapens it, and it's not enough. Like a little arm around the husband, a little, not even a peck on the cheek, it's cheap. We as LGBT fans deserve more than just, let's just suddenly make Sulu gay. Throw in a new gay character. And it should have been done a long time ago. It does feel cheap. I agree with you.
I think we have been promised one for Discovery, right?
Yes, you do.
So, yeah. All right, let's hold on to it.
And Brian Fuller, so we have
Of course.
Yeah.
All right, folks. Well, that's it for questions. Thank you, guys. Big thanks to Kyle Sater, everybody here at Adler. Big thanks to you guys for coming out. Thank you, Michi Trota, Tanya, DePass, and Mohanraj. Thank you so much for being on panel tonight. I'm Matt Peters. Have a safe drive home, folks.